Welcome to Educated Drinking. Today's episode, we're going to be looking at some whiskeys. I'm John.
I'm Meryl.
And, yeah.
Today we're looking at types of whiskey.
Types of whiskeys.
This is a continuation of our basic whiskey video. And we've got a bunch of whiskeys right in front of us here. And they're going to help us go over the different types of whiskeys that are out there.
So, all of these are grown within a grain belt that runs around the world. And that's where everyone grows the whiskeys. So, let's start where it all began.
In Ireland.
Ireland. By leprechauns.
Magical
leprechauns.
It's not a pot of gold, it's a pot of whiskey.
Yeah. Most of this is seen on St. Patrick's Day, which is unfortunate. There's some great brands out there. And the ever-popular and still debated on where it was invented, the Irish coffee.
Yes, most people say at the Buena Vista in San Francisco, I believe.
No, I think it was an airport in Dublin.
Oh, okay.
I like the Dublin thing. You know,
we'll agree to
rainy
disagree.
coffee, but we'll agree to disagree and just have to try coffees at each end
There you go.
of the pond.
Whoever would like to send us to the other side of the pond, we're taking donations of
That'd be awesome.
first class airline tickets.
Yeah, definitely.
So Jameson's is one of the most popular brands along with Bushmills, but there are quite a few smaller distillers in Ireland that are doing some single malt style whiskeys, as well as aging their whiskeys a bit longer, but the bigger houses are doing that too as well. And the single malt ones are patterned after Scotches, which have to be from Scotland. And the main difference between the Scottish and Irish whiskeys is going to be that the Irish whiskeys, the malt is dried in a
Closed container. No influence from whatever else is around it.
Right, whereas Scotch, out in the open.
Open container, a lot of smoke, a lot of peat, all kinds of stuff. You're going to get more flavors in it.
And so that's going to define the flavors of the two different whiskeys. The Irish whiskey is going to be much more mild, where the Scottish whiskey is going to be much more aggressive and smoky. So that's an easy way to remember which way they're going to taste.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to use a heavy, smoky whiskey in a cup of coffee. You would want to use something lighter like the Irish that has a little bouquet to it and just mix it up.
That's not going to be fighting with the flavor of
Exactly.
the coffee. Yeah. And so let's move on to Scotch then. Scotch is from Scotland. We've already gone over that. But there's two major styles within Scotland. There's the blended Scotch. Dewar's and Johnnie Walker are some popular brands of blended Scotch. And then there's single malt Scotches.
Our favorites.
A lot of people's favorites are the single malt Scotches, but there's nothing wrong with enjoying blended Scotch. It's going to be a little bit more mild in flavor, and it can be some of the best expressions of Scotch because it's quite an art to do the blending. But single malt is more popular these days and often considered the better type of Scotch. It's much more expensive.
Very expensive.
Which sometimes people equate with quality, but isn't always the case. But I do have to say with the Brooklady that John just poured for us, these are excellent Scotches and well worth the price.
Now, if you can't afford that, we could visit other areas that produce whiskeys, like America. And within that classification, we have bourbon, Tennessee, what else is there?
Rye
whiskey.
and other.
I mean, you don't want to call it corn whiskey because that's the stuff you get in the jar.
But bourbon's made out of corn.
Yes,
in fact, it has to be at least 51% corn. It's often about 2/3 to 70%. And that's one of the things that's going to distinguish it from rye, which is all rye. And then the distinction between bourbon and Tennessee whiskey is Tennessee whiskey has to be made in Tennessee, whereas bourbon can be made anywhere in the country. It's typically made in Kentucky, but there are distilleries all over the country.
And price is an issue right now. Bourbon is rising slowly, but you still get your best bang for your buck. Rye has already risen because it's smaller production and people have discovered it. And I discovered my first rye last year from Sazerac. It was absolutely stunning, and it totally changed my opinion on that.
Yeah, I've been enjoying rye for a while, but it's definitely become popular in the past couple of years, and it's becoming more difficult to find because of it, and unfortunately, much more expensive. But there are some great places to get rye from, and there's some great cocktails out there with rye, so I definitely recommend trying it if you haven't.
For the longest time during Prohibition, none of the stuff could come into the country, none of it could be made, so our friends to the north, Canada,
Canadian whiskeys.
Saved the American drinking public by whatever they did during Prohibition.
Made lots of whiskey.
Make lots of whiskey and sneak it across the border. Bathtub gins, all that kind of stuff. Good product, again. A lot of Scotsmen's up there because immigration came, swept across around the grain belt. Some really interesting stuff. And so surprisingly, there's a lot of stuff being done outside Canada, the United States, and Scotland. Japan is actually a big, not a big producer, a big consumer of single malts, and they've started making their own single malt whiskeys, which
Yeah.
pretty interesting. A little pricey for what they are, but a
Very
good addition
tasty.
to the list.
Yeah, they've been hiring some great people from Scotland and the United States to come over and help with the distillation and the aging, and they're doing a great job. And there's some single malt style whiskeys made here in the United States as well that are also quite tasty. But once again, neither of them can be called Scotch because they're not from Scotland.
That's right. So when you go out, just don't blurt out whiskey or bourbon. If you can think of a name, if you want to say Jameson or George T. Stagg or Sazerac, try to get to something a little bit more individual, and I think you're really going to have a good time.
Yeah, even if you can just remember the different types of whiskey and you know that you like one over the other, you're probably going to have a much better drinking experience if you say single malt Scotch instead of just whiskey.
Yeah, and enjoy, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, we're going to enjoy a little Brook Lager, and we'll see you at the next whiskey video.
Sure.